traveler walks down a winding path and finds himself, at the end, nowhere to go. Well, nowhere to go but home. Episode 2. The Prodigal Son. Final boarding call for Flight 15 was announced in the Zurich airport. A man who had been sitting in a chair for the last 2 hours stood and made his way to the boarding line. He showed his ticket and he boarded the plane. He sat in an aisle seat and prepared himself for the over 15-hour flight that awaited him. He put on some noise-canceling headphones and sat back to think about the challenge he had to face. He looked out the window as the plane went faster and faster until it took off the ground. He soared through the air, rising and rising until all he could see were clouds. He fell asleep for a couple hours, but he couldn't stay asleep. He had too much on his mind. Eventually, he saw the ocean, through gaps in the clouds. It was dark, and the waters were crashing against the shores. He arrived at a regional airport in a town called Hollow Falls, known for being downstream from a waterfall with many caves and only 60 minutes away from the largest city in the region, which was further downstream. It was a perfectly nice place to live, but few people wanted to. Many would-be explorers had gone missing in the caves just upstream, and that gave the town a stigma that discouraged people from living there. He stepped off the plane with his suitcase and went through the airport security. He stepped outside and pulled out his phone. He dialed the number that started his journey to this small town. It rang, and then somebody picked it up.
I'm here. Do I need to take a cab?
No. I'm sending somebody to come get you.
I can pay for the cab.
No. Stay where you are. I've sent somebody to get you.
She hung up and the man sat down on a bench. The wind was blowing and he forgot to pack a jacket. He sat there shivering for 20 minutes before a car pulled into the empty parking lot. The car window opened and the driver poked his head out.
Are you Leroy?
Yes.
Well, put your suitcase in the back and get up front.
Leroy did so.
May I ask who you are?
My name's George Mackenzie. I was Harold's roommate for a couple years. This all happened right after I moved out. I don't think I caused it, but I can't help but feel like I could have prevented it.
Has he worsened since I was called?
He started mumbling to himself and shaking whenever the TV is off.
How far is it?
We're almost there.
Why did it take so long to pick me up then?
I live like 15 minutes farther from the airport than Harold or Samantha.
She didn't want to pick me up, huh?
Not at all.
I guess I can't blame her.
They pulled up outside Harold's apartment, where Samantha was waiting by the door. Leroy stepped out of the car, grabbed his bag, and walked up to Samantha. He extended his hand.
It's been a long time, Samantha.
Cut the crap, Leroy.
Leroy pulled his hand back.
I figured it must be very serious since none of you have talked to me in the last 3 years.
You know what you did was unforgivable.
Do you think I don't know that? I wake up every morning wishing I could take her place. But all I can do is try to prevent it from happening to Harold.
That's why I called you. No matter how you make me feel, you care about Harold. And that is a big step up from those other doctors.
You need me to be the bad cop.
They aren't intimidated by me.
Take me to him.
Samantha escorted Leroy upstairs, and George followed behind. They reached the apartment and could clearly hear murmuring. The doctors were surrounding Harold, watching him convulse and mumble.
All right, all of you, it's time to get out.
You tried this yesterday. Why would we leave now?
You're from Geneva, aren't you?
Yes. Why?
Well, you might have heard of me. I have a small practice in Zurich.
Dr. Luthie's facial expression changed from smug to intimidated.
Wait, are you...
Leroy Wilson. Nice to meet you. Now I know any of you worth a damn have heard of me. I am taking this case.
On whose authority?
On my own.
Leroy walked up to Dr. Luthie and imposed himself.
It would be wise to leave. I could destroy any of your careers with one phone call.
I suggest we all leave. He isn't exaggerating.
The doctor shuffled out.
Now, Samantha, can I approach Harold?
Yes, you can. But I still hate you.
Leroy approached Harold and put his hands on Harold's shoulders.
I hate me too.
Agent 67 watched the events unfolding from surveillance cameras in the apartment. So many things were going wrong. Leroy wasn't supposed to be here. He pulled up the projected future.
Oh no. Oh no.
If Harold didn't get better, and Leroy didn't go home, Jack Wilson would never be born, and Agent 67's family would never have survived the destruction of Earth.
Why is it hard to remember? Have I been outside of time that long? No, I haven't thought about it in a while.
He slowly created the image of his old home in his mind. His hexagonal living pod where he lived with his parents, grandma, uncle, aunt, and cousins. The more he thought, the more he could picture it. The 6 hatches in the floor where they slept, the flaps in the walls that opened to produce their kitchen, dining room, and living room, the gray paneling that lined the room. He remembered his hatch. He would climb down to his 36-square-foot room. The more he reminisced, the more he tried not to think about the day he was recruited. But he couldn't stop thinking about his old life, and it became impossible to not think about the day it all ended. He woke up to the sounds of his cousins above.
Oh, they never shut up, do they?
He stood up and climbed the ladder to open his hatch. He made sure to knock on the ceiling in case somebody was standing on top of it. He heard his dad call him.
Hey! HJ's awake. How much food do you want?
Agent 67 poked his head out of the hatch.
Oh, I'm not hungry this morning.
Agent 67 climbed into the main room.
I'm gonna go out.
So soon?
I can pick up our food rations.
Well, will you at least say hi to your grandma? She's having one of those days.
Agent 67 walked over to his grandma sitting on the couch. She was watching the same recording that she watched every day when she thought about her husband.
Hey, Grams.
Why did he have to go?
I mean, that's what happens when you grow old, Grandma.
He was in his 40s.
He was?
You'll see someday.
Hey! HJ! Get back over here!
What is it?
Here's the list of what we need picked up.
Agent 67 took the list, then climbed out the hatch in the middle of the hexagon. He emerged to see some trees and his large habitation dome looming above. He walked among the trees, brushing his hands against the leaves. He saw his cousins playing in the distance.
I'll leave them be. It's not worth it.
Agent 67 made his way to the checkpoint to the outer domes. He showed his ID to the man at the checkpoint. The man looked at his ID, then glared.
Oh, you're one of them.
Look, man, I don't want any trouble.
The checkpoint worker let him through, but tripped him a little on the way in. Agent 67 ignored it and moved on. He had to pass through several checkpoints before he made it to Hydroponics Dome 4. He was walking back with his food when he ran into his friend Eleanor.
Hey, HJ.
Hey, Eleanor.
How have you been?
Oh, I'm okay. What's it like living in Secondary Hab Dome 2?
Yeah, I'm living the good life.
It's been a while since we were kicked out, but it's fine living in Primary Hab Dome 3.
Do you want to come see the view from the tower?
Yeah, I got time.
Eleanor escorted him to Secondary Hab Dome 2. He still got a lot of trouble from the guard, but less with Eleanor around. They made their way to the center of the dome and climbed up the ladder to the observation deck. Secondary Habitation Dome 2 was one of 4 medium-sized domes lining the outside of the colony. From the deck, they could see the 4 massive primary habitation domes in the center, surrounded by 100 gradually smaller domes in a 4-part spiral until reaching the secondary habitation domes on each end.
It's so beautiful.
You know, some days I wish I could have grown up on Earth.
What's so good about Earth?
Well, I wouldn't be harassed everywhere I went.
Eleanor stroked his hair.
Is it really that bad?
Are you kidding me? I can't even use my real name in public without being attacked. People call me slurs in the street, and we were moved to Primary Hab Dome 3 because they wanted to put us with the more violent rabble.
Why can't you just enjoy the view?
I'm sorry. I just hate how we're treated.
I have been speaking with the controller, and I might be able to convince him to let you back in with us.
Look, I appreciate that. I really do. But that's never going to happen.
You have to have hope. Without hope, we'll have nothing up here.
Maybe. Well, I better get going. My mom and dad are waiting for me.
Bye, HJ.
Bye, Eleanor.
He climbed down the ladder and calmly walked out to the checkpoint. He showed his ID, but this time, the guard felt confident.
Well, look what the cat dragged in.
I don't want any trouble.
Well, you see, your very existence is trouble, you little freak.
May I pass?
Yeah, sure. You can pass provided you cooperate.
Cooperate with what?
The checkpoint worker sucker punched Agent 67 in the gut and kicked him on the ground.
You crawl through the gate like the worm you are.
Agent 67 crawled through the gate and stood up on the other side.
Better than being the dick you are.
The sun was starting to go down, so he raced for his house, cutting corners, racing across alleys, all the fastest routes to get to the next checkpoint. He arrived at the checkpoint and sighed. He waited until he was the next person to be checked, but then he felt it. Somebody stole his bag. He whipped around to see a slender man bolting away with his bag in hand.
Hey, you!
Agent 67 chased the thief, turning corners and alleys until he finally spooked the thief, and the thief dropped his bag. Agent 67 picked up the bag and began a slower march back home. He turned a corner into the main street and stopped cold. In front of him was his habitation dome, and it was filled with flames. Right then, he was snapped out of his remembrance by a notification on his computer. Meanwhile, Leroy was pacing about the room, trying to formulate a plan.
Do you have anything yet?
You're saying he starts shaking whenever the show is turned off?
Yes, they kept turning it off and waiting to see what happened.
And what is this?
Leroy pulled the trunk out from the side of the room.
He got it open?
Could you guys not get it open?
Yeah, we spent a whole night trying to open it, to no avail.
I think I'll take a closer look.
Leroy pulled out the batleth and raised it into the air.
Kapla!
What?
Leroy glanced over to the TV.
You said they tried turning the TV off, but did they try just taking the flash drive out?
What difference would that make?
We'll never know unless we try.
Leroy walked over to the TV and pulled the flash drive out of the side. The TV was static, but Harold was not. He started shaking, but not in the same way as before. Instead of shaking like he was in pain, he was shaking like he was fighting something. His eyes darted around the room until he fixated on Leroy. Leroy rushed over and held on to Harold. Harold kept shaking until 6:03 a.m. At 6:03, he stood up and walked into his room. Leroy and Samantha followed.
Has this ever happened before?
No? What is he doing?
He's reaching under his bed.
Harold pulled out a DVD entitled Star Trek of Gods and Men. It had a second DVD inside, labeled Instructions.
I forgot to ask this, but do you have any clue where Harold got the flash drive?
I just figured he got it from a neighbor.
That's impossible. All of our neighbors are die-hard Star Wars fans.
I'll watch the instruction DVD.
What if you go into the same state as Harold?
This is the best lead we have, and I am not going to give it up just because there's a potential danger. If I can fix Harold, I can fix Lucy, and if I can fix Lucy, I will finally be able to sleep at night.
Which is why I will watch it, in a different room where you and Harold are both safe from any poor effects.
Should I come with you?
No. If there is something on here, I want to minimize potential harm that could be done.
Samantha left Harold's room and entered George's old room. She pulled out her laptop and opened its DVD player. The screen loaded until it settled on black. She plugged her headphones in.
Hello, Samantha. I knew it would be you to watch the video. How did I know that, you may ask? Well, I think I know you after all that we've been through. Don't worry, though. The trance Harold is in is temporary. I thank you for your help. If you have Harold watch Star Trek of Gods and Men, he will find himself again. I would keep Leroy around, though. There might be some side effects.
Samantha tried to replay the message, but the disc was blank now. She walked into Harold's room.
Well?
Some director's commentary about how if you never see Star Trek of Gods and Men, your experience will always be incomplete.
Huh. Maybe all we need to do is complete the experience.
They walked over to the living room. Harold had returned and was sitting on the sofa. Leroy placed the disc inside of the DVD player. Harold was quiet the entire time, watching attentively. When the movie was finished, Harold stood up, blinking, looking around the room. Harold smiled as he gazed upon Samantha, then George. Then his eyes moved to Leroy. He walked up to Leroy with visible confusion on his face.
You had an incident like Lucy. Leroy has been here to help.
Leroy extended his hand. Harold grasped it with clear emotions on his face. He gazed up and down before he raised his other hand and stared at it for a moment.
You Batak!
Harold clenched his fist and punched Leroy across the face. Leroy stepped back.
Okay. I deserved that.
It was so worth it. But so painful!
I'll be out of your life soon. Don't worry.
Well, don't you think you should stay in case there are side effects?
That is a good point. Harold, do you mind if I stay in the spare room until I can determine that your condition is stable?
I guess I do need a new roommate. Thanks a lot, George.
I'm gonna head out. Susan's waiting for me at home.
Don't worry. Chances are you won't have many problems and I'll be able to get out of your hair. Believe it or not, I want to be here just as much as you want me here.
Agent 67 saw the notification on the screen. 49 was on her way back. He composed himself and went to meet 49. 49 walked into the time pod and stared at Agent 67.
I understand the logic in assuming I did something to time. Given my reputation, you would be a fool not to consider the possibility. But I promise you, it wasn't me.
But here.
Agent 67 handed Agent 49 the paper.
Look, I know I could be a pretty damn good storyteller, but 11 is just a ghost story we tell the newbies to scare them.
Well, then where do you think it came from?
Somebody probably slipped it in your pocket in the launch bay. I think I've heard 61 did that to 63 and 64. Maybe it was him.
I guess that would make some sense.
Is something on your mind?
It's hard not to think about the other me.
Yeah, I'm actually from this time.
Really?
Yeah, I was recruited about 3 years from now.
Do you want to talk about it?
Would it help you if I did?
Maybe.
When I was young, I had a tougher life. I was in an accident, and my parents never let me forget it. I left the house as soon as I could and moved as far away as I could afford.
Where did you end up?
I ended up living in Switzerland, and I woke up every day to the mountains. I had a modest but joyful existence. One day I met someone. When I first met him, he was so filled with self-loathing that he didn't realize I liked him. Eventually, I helped him realize how amazing he was, and he helped me to see the same in myself. It was the happiest I think I'll ever be. One day, we took a trip to Paris for a week. We traveled around together and saw so many beautiful things. Until the last day of the trip. It was raining cats and dogs, so we stayed in until it was time to leave. It had gotten dark and we were making our way to the train station. We got lost in the labyrinth of streets and alleyways, and we finally made it to the train station and the area was deserted. We made our way back to the bench to wait for the train, and he went to go buy a snack for us, and I sat waiting for him. About 5 minutes later, I heard it. Somebody running. I went to go find him, and I did. He was laying on the ground in a pool of his own blood. His eyes were glassy and his wallet was gone. That's the day I lost everything. I was recruited the next day.
Wow. I'm so sorry.
I've had hundreds of years to cope with it.
So, if you don't mind me asking, what was his name?
I honestly can't remember anymore. It happens once you've been alive for hundreds of years. You just can't remember the beginning that well. Can you still remember their names?
How did you know?
There is not a single person in the agency with a happy story for joining.
I was living on the first Martian colony, and my family died in the explosion of Habdome 3. After the fire was contained, I went back to my home, and my family's remains had been cleared out. I searched the house for anything that was left. I almost gave up, but when I went into my grandma's room, I found her safety box was unopened. I had to pry it open, but I got inside. I found the flash drive for the file she watched every day. I decided I should watch it. Maybe it was a photo album or a wedding video or something.
What was it?
It was footage from the bridges on the day the Earth was destroyed. My grandma, and who I assumed was my grandpa, led my family into the bridge, and once everybody was inside, he shut himself out. They were one ticket short, and so he decided to be the odd man out and die. But he didn't tell anyone, so they wouldn't try to stop him or protest. The camera was outside, but I could still hear my grandmother screaming through the door as the bridge took off. I will forever be haunted of the image of my grandfather walking away into the dusty nothingness. I don't think I'll ever forget the last thing he said.
What did he say?
He said it had to be you guys, for the betterment of humanity.
That's a sobering coincidence.
Yeah, to think that's the motto I've been serving for years.
I know it's hard, but just remember what we're fighting for. Somewhere, somehow, there's a possibility that will never happen and your family will be whole.
Yeah, I guess.
I'll cover for you. Why don't you just go for a walk? I promise, the forest helps.
Thanks. I need it.
Agent 67 stood up and walked outside. Agent 49 smiled and slowly made her way to her quarters. She sat down on her cot for a moment, then stood up and opened her closet. She pulled out a filing cabinet labeled Relevant Information.
Open level 5.
State your name.
Agent 49, Platform 23.
Level 5 clearance granted. Which file would you like to view?
2 files. Agent 67 and Agent 11.
Granted.
2 files were ejected, and Agent 49 picked them up.
If you are here, I'm gonna find out.
Thank you for watching Harold the Star Trek Nerd. Harold the Star Trek Nerd is a Nexus Group podcast written by Dylan Ash, produced by Hayden Reese, Haley DiGirolamo, and Dylan Ash. Extra special thanks to the cast for this one. They are, in order of appearance, Cage Eschbach, Haley DiGirolamo, Chase Hinman, Hayden Reese, Donovan Peterson, Gabe Zollinger, Kaylee Wilson, William Stewart, Spencer Holland, Samantha Woodruff, and, finally, Levi Hinrichs. Sound effects for Harold the Star Trek Nerd were sourced through Creative Commons at freesound.org. Tune in February 24th for the next installment. Thank you, and have a nice day.